Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas! Hey, I'm Plus Infinite, and today we're going to be talking about a new budget-friendly Fiendsmith Super Quant build. Let's check it out. Back in September, I posted an interview with Asparagus Benz, one of the top players innovating in the Super Quant archetype Discord. Back then, he was able to pilot the deck all the way to first place at his locals. Of course, that was before they banned Beatrice. With the loss of Beatrice, Super Quants has lost one of its rare one-card combos. With any luck, when the Fiendsmith cards come out in Master Duel, we may have a brief period of time where we can do that one-card combo again. If so, then I'll do an updated video once those cards come out. But today we're talking about the TCG. Now I know what you're thinking. Using the Fiendsmith cards to support a rogue archetype like Super Quants doesn't make much sense considering how expensive the Fiendsmith cards have gotten. Now, of course, I'm not telling you to go out of your way to buy Fiendsmith cards just to support Super Quants, but if you have the budget for it, or if you already own a copy of at least one of each of the key Fiendsmith cards, then you can make a build like this one on a reasonable budget. Last I checked, this deck is well under $200, and around half of that is coming from Engraver himself. So, what do the Fiendsmith cards do for Super Quants? Well, Fiendsmith Super Quants is one of the best variants that I've seen yet. It has a variety of different 2-card combos that don't require any discards, freeing up the other 3 cards in our hand to be used to stop our opponent. If you don't happen to see any Super Quant cards, then Fiendsmith does pretty well enough on its own. And if you don't see any Fiendsmith cards, then guess what? ELPHNT puts 2 bodies on board. And you know what that means. We link into Moon and Requiem. Oh yeah, ELPHNT is full Fiendsmith combo. So with that out of the way, let's jump into the deck profile. Let's start out with the Super Quant cards. We've got 2 ELPHNT, 2 white, 2 blue, 2 red, and 1 green, just like the other Super Quant variants on my channel. We've also got 3 Diviner the Herald with Trias Hierarchia, an honorary Super Quant, and 1 Magna Carrier. Now if you're a Super Quant fan, you might be staring at this going, where's Emergency Teleport? Emergency Teleport, of course, is part of a 2-card combo that you can see on my channel here, but I've got news for you. In this build, Emergency Teleport is not a card you want to see.
Oh, you crazy!
I know, crazy, right? And that's because Emergency Teleport is strictly an inferior 2-card combo when compared to Fiendsmith.
What did he say?
You see, Emergency Teleport and ELPHNT, while being a 2-card combo, does require 2 discards out of your hand. This means that it's strictly a worse version of the Fiendsmith ELPHNT combo. Instead, I've chosen to play 3 copies of Small World. Small World is a card that inherently is a neg-1 in card advantage, and most of the time that would not be ideal in Super Quants since we require so many discards. But because in this build, we can generate a true 2-card combo with 0 discards, we can afford to use one of the cards in our hand to search for either ELPHNT or Engraver. If you'd like to see the Small World bridges in this deck, I'll leave a link to this handy graphic in the description. Basically, Small World serves the purposes of Emergency Teleport much more effectively in this build. Now for the Fiendsmith cards. Like I said, this is a budget build, so we've reduced it to be as minimal as possible, with just 1 copy of Engraver, Lacrima the Crimson Tears, Luri, and Tract. To supplement that, we've got 3 copies of Terratop and 1 Takatomborg, because of course Terratop gets you Takatomborg specials itself, and then that'll give you 2 bodies to link into Moon. It's also worth noting that Terratop and Takatomborg could be replaced with Millennium Sengenjin and Golem, but unfortunately these cards play much worse into Detonator. The Speedroids aren't that much better, but at least if Terratop resolves, you do get 1 extra card to your hand, which could serve the purpose of a Small World bridge. And you're not down 2,000 life points. If you have the budget, or if you already have the cards available, then I would certainly recommend replacing all 4 of these cards with 2 more copies of Engraver and Tract respectively. Otherwise, I would just stick to this ratio because Terratop is not worth playing at any less than 3. With this small package, we have access to 5 1-card Fiendsmith combos in Engraver, Tract, and Terratop. If you include Small World, that bumps it up to 8. and with access to the full package of Fiendsmith cards, that will give us 9. By the way, you could consider including a copy of Paradise, but unless you're playing more copies of Lacrima the Crimson Tears, which I wouldn't really recommend in this build, I personally don't think it's worth introducing another potential brick. Honestly, if we wanted to include a brick, I'd probably sooner try and fit in the Armored Xyz package before I go for Paradise. Next, we've got 18 non-engine, an even split of 9 board breakers and 9 hand traps, for a total of 43 cards. The hand traps are pretty self-explanatory. At this point, Ash, Valor, and Imperm have become something like staples in pretty much every deck, especially since they may be the most effective cards to deal with Ryzeal Duo Drive, a card you definitely don't want resolving against you. Although, if your opponent does have access to Ryzeal Cross, some of these cards become a little less useful. So that's where board breakers come in, and we've got some interesting choices, including Santa Claus himself. Santa Claus and the other kaijus are pulling double and even triple duty in this deck. Not only are they decent spot removal to deal with things like Ryzeal Detonator and Neo Tempest Terahertz, but they also serve as bridges for Small World. Santa Claus, despite being a light level 6 fiend, can actually be used to bridge into either Fiendsmith or Super Quants. You see, you can use Santa Claus to pivot into another fiend like Lava Golem or Radian, and then get into Fiendsmiths. Or you can use it to pivot into another light monster like Jizukiru to get into any of the Super Quant starters. Lava Golem and Radian can also serve as bridges for each other to get into any of the Fiendsmith cards, and Lava Golem acts as a bridge from Ash into any of the Fiendsmith cards. Similarly, you can use Lava Golem to bridge into Ash and then into ELPHNT. Or you can use Radian to bridge into Santa Claus and then back into ELPHNT. Meanwhile, Jizukiru is probably the best Small World bridge in the deck, since it can get you from any light, including Valor, ELPHNT, White Layer, Diviner, or any of the Fiendsmith cards, into any other light monster. Now, if that wasn't enough, they also serve another purpose, as targets for our final board breaker, Metaltronus. Metaltronus is a somewhat confusing card that allows you to target an opponent's monster and summon from your hand, deck, or extra deck a monster that matches 2 or more of the following characteristics: type, attribute, and attack. Unlike Small World, level and defense don't matter here, and we actually want 2 or more matching attributes. If you summon a monster like this, you'll negate the opponent's monster, and since it's a quick play, it can act as something like a chalice that will also summon a monster to your field, usually something very useful. Also, they can't activate the targeted monster's effects in response to this card. Drawing Metaltronus alone against Ryzeal or Malice, you can stop their Ryzeal Detonator or their Neo Tempest Terahertz. For Detonator, you can summon a light monster with 3000 attack from your extra deck that also happens to be a fiend. Or against Terahertz, you might think, how are we going to get a dark Cyburst monster with 3000 attack out of our deck? And while there are many targets you could play, there is a dark Cyburst monster that we can play in our extra deck that also happens to be good with Ultimate Slayer. And just keep in mind, if you're using Metaltronus against Malice, that your opponent can still chain Deceive Worm in the grave to negate Metaltronus. So, since it's a quick play, I would try and activate it in response to Terahertz's effect to dump the Deceive Worm if they haven't already done so. But if you're not playing against any of those decks, and you happen to draw a kaiju as well, you can use Metaltronus to target the kaiju. For example, Santa Claus is a light fiend, and Lava Golem is a fiend with 3000 attack. Now, where have I seen those characteristics before? Also, Radian is a fiend with 2800 attack. Sound familiar? Jizukiru, despite being the best Small World target, is probably the worst Metaltronus target. Although, since it's a light machine, you can actually use it to summon out Lusterex, which will be one of the 3 Super Quant mechs you need to make Magnus. Or, you can use it to summon out Magnus himself. A 3600 attack body is still nothing to scoff at, even if its effects are negated. By now I might have spoiled some of the extra deck, so let's jump into that next. To start with, we've got the 5 Super Quantic Xyz monsters, Magnus and each of the mechs. Next, we've got Mereologic Aggregator, which acts as a target for Metaltronus against Malice specifically, although it also serves another purpose with Ultimate Slayer, which, spoiler, is in the side deck. You can use it against Ryzeal to target the Ryzeal and spin it back, then Aggregator will negate the cross. Although it is a prime target to cut if you want to include something like SP Little Knight or maybe Zeus. I cut Zeus because I don't have another Xyz to overlay over. I'd have to make another Super Quant mech, or just make one mech and then overlay over it. That's an option as well, I suppose. But it didn't seem like it was as useful in this deck. That's why I cut Zeus. Sorry, Zeus. You could play SP Little Knight, but I think that there are much better things for me to do with 2 bodies, and honestly, SP Little Knight is a lot better if you're playing it with IP as well. So it's up to you what you do with that spot. Aerial Eater is played as part of the combo, which I'll show you later, and then Desiree is, in case you don't draw any Super Quants, it's good to end on Desiree. Underworld Goddess serves as a target for Metaltronus against Ryzeal, and of course you can also use it with Moon for its intended effect. As long as you have Moon and one other body, you can get rid of 2 bodies on the opponent's board to go into Underworld Goddess, which is a fun interaction as well. Obviously, Moon, Requiem, and Sequence are the Fiendsmith cards. The remaining Link monsters, Cross Sheep, Promethean Princess, and Salamandrate Sunlight Wolf, are part of the combo, and I'll show you that in a minute. By the way, big shoutouts to Asparagus Benz for coming up with Salamandrate Sunlight Wolf to use as a Fire Link target in Super Quants alongside Promethean Princess. You'll see why in a little bit. Finally, my side deck for this format, we've got 3 copies of Ultimate Slayer, which I spoiled earlier. Ultimate Slayer is really good against Ryzeal and Malice. You can use it to send Mereologic Aggregator against Ryzeal, and then Mereologic Aggregator will target the cross to stop that. Then you only have to deal with 1 more detonator, which is still a pain, but not too bad for 1 board breaker. And then you can use it in Malice against their Terahertz, and they can't even respond with Deceive Worm, which is really cool. But honestly, you could use Ultimate Slayer against pretty much any deck. For example, against Yubel, you might use Ultimate Slayer to target the Varudras, and then send Mereologic Aggregator, target another monster or card, and negate it, so there's some use there. Or you can use it on a fusion monster, like let's say Phantom of Yubel, for example, and then send Desiree, which will then send another card onto the grave. So that's 2 for 1 on 2 different types of monsters. With Links, it's a little bit harder. You don't really have a good target in the extra deck. You can always send something like Underworld Goddess, for example, something you probably won't use as part of your combo. But basically, the only time when Ultimate Slayer isn't useful is if you're up against a Synchro deck. But pretty much the best Synchro deck, Centurion, is kind of suffering against Ryzeal, so yeah, it's not likely you're going to see Synchros as much this format. The rest of the cards are going first cards. We've got Lancia for the Malice matchup, obviously a blowout card against them. And then Thrust and the Thrust targets. D-Barrier also shuts down Ryzeal pretty well. And then we've got Sanctum, which of course can be used to summon out Lancia. Thrust into Sanctum, and Lancia means you have 9 ways to stop Malice. If that's a problem for you, that would be a good counter to them. But obviously you can side in whatever you want. Typically I don't show the side deck in these profiles just because I want to leave it open to whatever format is going on at the time. But in this particular one, I thought it was very pertinent for me to show off what exactly I'm doing here, especially with the fact that I've got Ultimate Slayer in the side. I'm not too concerned about the going second matchup, since with 9 hand traps and 9 board breakers, I think going second is going to be pretty easy most of the time, as long as you draw a good hand. But yeah, that's about it for the deck profile, so now let me show you that 2-card combo. For this combo, we'll be using Anyway into the Fiendsmith Engine. In this example, I'll be using Terratop, but you can also use Engraver, or Tract, or even Millennium Engine. And then Anyway into ELPHNT. This includes ELPHNT, or Diviner the Herald, or if you're playing it, Foolish Burial and 1-for-1, though those latter 2 will require 1 extra card out of your hand. Otherwise, this combo should be a true 2-card combo. To get started, we'll use Terratop. special summoning it, and then searching for Takatomborg, which will then special summon itself. We'll take these two and link into Moon of the Closed Heaven. Then, of course, we'll take Moon and link it into Fiendsmith Requiem. Requiem will then tribute itself to reveal and special summon Lacrima the Crimson Tears. Lacrima's effect will activate if we haven't already used Engraver, and that will send the Engraver to the grave. If you already used Engraver, and it's now in the grave, then obviously you don't actually have to use Lacrima's effect to put it in the grave. You can just choose to not activate Lacrima, that's fine. Now, we'll need to use Engraver's effect to revive itself. For this, we'll use Moon of the Closed Heaven to shuffle it back. But if you used Engraver and got to Tract and Luri, then you would shuffle Luri back instead. So we'll put Moon of the Closed Heaven back on the bottom of our extra deck and summon out Engraver. Now we'll take the two Light Fiends and link into Sequence. Sequence now will attempt to activate its effect to fusion summon by shuffling two Light Fiends from the grave back into the deck, leaving Engraver in the grave. This will summon out Aerial Eater, which requires two fiend monsters with the same attribute. Aerial Eater's effect on summon will send from the deck to the grave another fiend. Since we don't have a second Engraver, we're going to be using Santa Claus. Ho ho ho! Putting Santa Claus in the grave, we will now take the Aerial Eater and the Sequence and link into Cross Sheep. Cross Sheep is a key card in this combo. It's very important, but it needs to point to a fusion monster in order to use its effect. So how will we do that? Well, it just so happens that Aerial Eater has an effect to revive itself by shuffling back two fiend monsters that are level 6 or higher with the same attribute. So we will take the Engraver and the Santa Claus and banish them. Sorry, I think I said shuffle them. I actually meant banish them. So this means that we're losing access to our Engraver, which is a shame, but that will allow us to revive the Aerial Eater. And of course, we'll be making something much, much better than Engravers anyway, so it's okay that we banished it. So now that Cross Sheep is pointing to a fusion, what will we do? Well, we'll use our normal summon to summon out ELPHNT. Now, it's very important that Cross Sheep points to both the fusion and a monster that's about to be special summoned. I like to put my ELPHNT in the zone that Cross Sheep points to, so that when I tribute, I remember to put the monster in that zone. So I'm going to tribute with ELPHNT's effect and reveal 3 Super Quants, red, blue, and white. At this point, it's random which one gets summoned. So I'm going to pause the footage, and we're going to go over each scenario individually. First, let's say that white gets summoned, and red and blue go to grave. Now, what we want to do is chainlink 1 Cross Sheep, since a monster was summoned to the zone that it points to, we'll be able to summon a level 4 lower from our grave. This does not negate its effects, which is very important, because this will allow us to activate Blue's effect to search for the field spell. Now, Cross Sheep has to be chainlink 1, because Blue Layer can miss timing. So always chainlink 1 Cross Sheep. Now, we can go chainlink 2, White's effect. You would think that I would activate Red's effect now, but I don't want to revive the other Super Quant, which is blue, with Red Layer. Instead, I'd rather revive it with Cross Sheep, so we won't be activating Red's effect. Now, we're going to resolve the chain backwards, sending another White from deck with White's effect, and reviving Blue with Cross Sheep's effect. Now, on a new chain, we're going to activate Blue Layer, which will search for the field spell, and White Layer, which will search for ELPHNT. So we'll add ELPHNT from our deck to our hand. We could go from grave too, but I'm actually going to leave that one in grave for later. And then we're going to resolve Blue to add the field spell. So generally, you'll be in this position that I'm showing you here, no matter what Super Quant gets summoned. You'll have Blue and White. Blue will have resolved to search for the field spell, and White at some point during the chain will have activated to give you an ELPHNT. Now I'm going to go ahead and activate the field spell, and we can then go on to make some Super Quant mechs. But before we do that, how am I going to make Magnus? I only have access to 2 Super Quant names, blue and white. Typically you need 3 to make Magnus, right? How am I going to get the other Super Quant name? Well, we're going to use the Link 2 and a 3rd Link material to summon Promethean Princess. And Promethean Princess will allow us to revive back the red layer from earlier. This will trigger Red's effect to target a Super Quant engrave and add it back to our hand. Now we have 2 discard fodder to make 2 mechs, but we're going to need to make a 3rd mech somehow, so how are we going to do that? Well, I'll show you in a minute. Now we're going to activate Magna Carrier, pitching one of the Super Quant ELPHNTs to target red layer and go into the red mech. If you're going second, you can use Magna Liger's effect here to detach, but the problem is, if you do that, red layer won't be able to revive anything since you're currently fire locked. I prefer not to do that effect ever, and instead, just link these 2 off immediately into our Fire Link 2, Salamandrate Sunlight Wolf. Now, Sunlight Wolf has an effect that if you summon to the zone that it's pointing to, you can add a fire monster from your grave back to your hand. This will be important in a minute, so make sure that you, at some point during the combo, summon to the zone beneath Sunlight Wolf, or preemptively, just make sure that that zone is open. Since we have the ability to overlay over our Super Quant monsters, we can summon to the zone that sunlight points to quite easily. But before we do any of that, now that we've linked Sunlight Wolf off, we've actually triggered Red Layer's effect again. So now we have the ability to summon back the White Layer that we sent with white earlier. This will give us the ability to make Luster X by overlaying into there we go, and then we need to discard with the field spell to target and then go into Grand Pulse. This will trigger Sunlight Wolf to add back Red Layer from the grave. Now the Super Quant mechs each have an effect to attach a Super Quant from field or hand to themselves. So you can attach to either Luster X or Grand Pulse. I'll choose attaching to Grand Pulse. Now we have Grand Pulse red, blue, Luster X, and 2 whites. We have 6 different materials to make Magnus. Plus, we have the Magna Liger engrave, which will make 7 materials. We'll send the field spell, target the red engrave and the Luster X and Grand Pulse, and we'll overlay them all into a 7 material Magnus, meaning it will have all its effects active, including the search lock and the non-target shuffle. Now I'll show you what to do if blue is summoned. Typically, we want Cross Sheep to revive blue, but if blue gets summoned, we can do something different. What's going to happen is we still chainlink 1 Cross Sheep, just as a habit, chainlink 2 blue, and then we'll say chainlink 2 red to target and revive the white layer, and then chainlink 4 white to grab ELPHNT. So let's resolve that, grabbing ELPHNT from deck to hand, then resolve red, reviving the white, and then we'll resolve blue, adding the Magna Carrier, and we'll resolve Cross Sheep. Now we could summon back anything that's level 4 or lower here, but I'm just going to summon back the ELPHNT. If you do that, however, keep in mind that we still need to have a target for Red Layer to add back later. So because of that, I'm going to go ahead and activate the field spell, and then I'm going to first pitch the ELPHNT in my hand to target and make Grand Pulse, which will give us a target for Red Layer in a minute. So we're going to link now Cross Sheep and Aerial Eater into Promethean Princess. Promethean will target the Red Layer and summon it back. Then Red Layer will target the ELPHNT engrave and add it back to our hand. Now we can pitch using the field spell targeting Red Layer to make Magna Liger once again, and we'll link these 2 off into Sunlight Wolf and red's already activated its grave effect in this scenario, so all we have left to do is activate ELPHNT's effect to target the white layer and make both level 7. Then we'll overlay into Luster X, triggering Sunlight Wolf to add back the red layer. And just like before, we'll attach red to Grampulse, send the field spell, target the Magnaliger Engrave, the blue and the white, and we'll summon out Magnus, making all 7 materials under Magnus. And there you go. Now we'll take a look at what happens if red is the one that gets summoned and white and blue go to grave. First off, in this example, red is actually going to be the least ideal because this will require us to use up our red effect to add back the white from earlier. So we're going to activate Cross Sheep as Chainlink 1 always, then red as Chainlink 2 targeting the white to add it back to our hand. This means that we won't have an extra discard fodder later, so we will actually have to use 1 discard out of our hand. But in any case here, we've got Cross Sheep Chainlink 1, red Chainlink 2 targeting the white in the grave to add it back to our hand, and white as Chainlink 3. So we're going to resolve white by getting ELPHNT to our hand, then resolve red to add back white, then we'll resolve Cross Sheep to summon back blue. On a new chain, we'll activate blue's effect to search for the field spell. Now we can activate the field spell, and we're going to have to activate white's effect to send the red to the grave and summon itself. On summon, we will activate white's effect to send a white from the deck to the grave. We won't be triggering red's effect at all just yet because we want red to revive the white later. So, now that we're in this position, we can link the Cross Sheep and Aerial Eater into Promethean Princess, use Princess's effect to target and revive the red, and this is where we would normally activate red's effect to get an extra discard fodder, but unfortunately we don't have it. So instead, we're going to discard 1 card, target the red layer, and then make the Magnaliger. Then we'll take the 2 and link them into Sunlight Wolf. Now, when this happens, red will be able to target the white that we sent with white's effect earlier. So that will revive back. At this time, it's worth noting that the Sunlight Wolf placement here does matter, because if you really want to save that card in your hand, you can make a 6 material Magnus instead of a 7 material Magnus, which is not like that big of a difference, but I mean ultimately the difference is whether or not you keep the search lock up after you activate Magnus's effect, which in my opinion is like a huge thing, because like it's a really big power play to keep that search lock up even after shuffling back a monster. But anyways, going back to this, if you really want to save the card out of your hand, you want to make sure that Sunlight Wolf has a zone clear, that you can overlay the 2 whites into Luster X, and this will give you red back to your hand, which you can use as discard fodder to target the blue. Now when you make Magnus, you'll be sending and targeting white, blue, and red, and this will make a 6 material Magnus. But the problem is this is 6 materials without even having 6 different names.
Quick note, in this branch of the combo, you can actually still save a discard by sending green off of white's effect earlier. This will allow you to overlay into Ouroboros, and when you make Magnus, you'll have 6 materials with different names, so you can keep the search lock up. Though I still recommend using the discard to make a 7 material Magnus.
Realistically, what you want to do is you want to discard the card, target the blue, make the Grampulse. This will trigger Sunlight Wolf to add back red. Then we can take the 2 whites, overlay for Luster X, and attach with Grampulse the red, send the field spell, target the Magnaliger Engrave in the blue and the white, and we will make the 7 mat Magnus with
6 different names, giving us the search lock and 7 materials. So even if our opponent makes something bigger, we can shuffle it back by detaching white layer specifically. Since we do actually have 2 copies of white layer, we have to detach that, and we will still have 6 different names, keeping the search lock up. And there you have it. That's the combo. Well, that about does it for this video. Thanks so much for watching to the end. If you liked the video, do be sure to leave a comment down below to let me know what you think of this deck profile. I've been working on it for some time, and I think I've got the right ratios for now, but there's definitely some room for improvement. Also, don't forget to subscribe for more Super Quant content on the way. I've got quite a few videos in the works, including Melodious Super Quants, Brilliant Fusion, a return to Super Heavy Samurai, and more. Plus, in February, there are some new cards coming out that I think will change the game for Super Quants even more. Let's hope 2025 is the year of new Super Quant support. Anyways, I'll see you next video. Until then, I've been Plus Infinite. Thanks so much for watching. Stay cool, take care, and have a good rest of your day. See ya in 2025.
Hello, viewers. It's me, Super Quantum Fairy ELPHNT. You're watching Plus Infinite. Subscribe for more Super Quantum content. Ay, 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 ay.